Picture a soul who forsakes ease, security, and all he has ever known. He relinquishes a flourishing vocation, a settled existence, and ventures toward an uncharted continent, a place of peril and hostility, where peril seems to lie in wait at every turn. Now, envision that on this journey of profound sacrifice, he uncovers something so grievous, so merciless, that he dedicates every drop of his being, every tear, every single day of his life, to eradicating it. And what he unearthed, my friends, did not merely alter a nation. It reverberated through the very foundations of an entire empire. I speak of David Livingstone, a man of humble origins, devoid of substantial means, influential connections, possessing nothing more than an unwavering conviction. Yet, this unassuming individual became the vessel through which the Almighty revealed to the world one of history's most heinous transgressions: the African slave trade. In this presentation, you will learn what prompted Livingstone to abandon everything. You will witness the solitary struggles he endured in the African wilderness, the devastating losses that nearly shattered him, and how his quiet fortitude ignited a transformation that echoed through generations. This is not merely the chronicle of a clergyman. It is the saga of a man who demonstrated that when an individual completely surrenders to the divine, even the most formidable dominions can be overthrown. But before we embark on this narrative, I wish to inquire: do you believe the divine can still employ ordinary individuals to redirect the destinies of nations? If it is your aspiration to be utilized by the Almighty in a transformative manner, inscribe in the comments, "Employ me, Lord, as your instrument." David Livingstone entered the world in 1813 in Blantyre, a modest working-class hamlet in Scotland. His family was impoverished, so much so that by the age of 10, he was already toiling 14 hours a day in a textile mill. While other youngsters frolicked, David operated formidable machinery, inhaling the stifling air of the weaving rooms. Yet, there was something distinctive about him. Even when utterly fatigued, he would position a book atop the apparatus and read while he worked. In the evenings, following an entire day on the factory floor, he attended evening instruction. Livingstone was propelled by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, and even more so, a yearning for the divine. He embraced faith in his youth, and soon felt an intense burning within his soul, a missionary vocation. But it was not just any calling. Livingstone aspired to journey to China. He envisioned proclaiming the gospel in the East, following in the footsteps of other renowned evangelists of his epoch. However, Providence had alternative designs. While preparing to become a medical missionary, Livingstone encountered Robert Moffat, a seasoned evangelist who had ministered in South Africa. Moffat recounted tales of vast, unexplored territories, of millions of Africans who had never encountered the name of Jesus, of entire tribes dwelling in spiritual obscurity. And then Moffat uttered words that irrevocably altered everything. "There is a vast plain to the north, where I have observed on sunny mornings the smoke of 1,000 hamlets where no missionary has ever set foot." Those pronouncements pierced Livingstone's heart like an arrow. China had sealed its portals to foreign missionaries. But Africa was beckoning, and Livingstone understood this to be his appointed path. In 1840, at the age of 27, he set sail for South Africa. He departed from all he held dear: family, comfort, security. He had no premonition that this decision would lead him directly into the abyss of darkness, and that what he would discover there would alter the trajectory of history. But what Livingstone failed to grasp was that Africa would not merely be a field for evangelism. It would become a battleground, and the adversary he would confront would be more than spiritual. The worst was yet to unfold. The moment Livingstone's boots touched African soil for the first time, he was unaware of the inferno he was about to confront. He commenced his evangelistic endeavors in Kuruman, South Africa, alongside Robert Moffat. But he soon recognized a profound reality. There were countless individuals beyond the already reached territories. Entire tribal communities deep within the continent had never heard the gospel, and Livingstone could not remain quiescent. He resolved to venture further, much further. Livingstone penetrated regions previously untrodden by any European. He traversed parched deserts, impenetrable jungles teeming with wild fauna, and formidable rivers where crocodiles lurked. He battled debilitating tropical maladies, malaria, dysentery, fevers that plunged him into delirium for days. Imagine a solitary man, consumed by fever, shivering from chills beneath the African sun, without a semblance of medicine, succumbing to his affliction, armed only with his scripture and his devotion. But Livingstone persevered. He mastered indigenous tongues and garnered the trust of communities that had never before beheld a pale-skinned individual. He proclaimed the gospel and expounded the holy texts. He was not merely establishing congregations, he was forging pathways where none existed. And it was during these expeditions, my friends, that Livingstone began to perceive something that chilled him to the bone. Columns of men, women, and children shackled, emaciated forms bearing the scars of the lash, herded like livestock across the arid expanse, entire villages reduced to ashes, families irrevocably sundered, their very humanity plundered. He was witnessing firsthand the barbarity of the slave trade. Livingstone was aware of slavery's existence, but beholding it in such proximity, witnessing the wrenching of children from their mothers' embraces, observing men bartered like chattel, it fractured his spirit in ways he could never have conceived. And then he made a resolution that would reshape everything. He would not be merely a proselytizer, he would be a witness. He would meticulously document every atrocity, every barbarity, every transgression against humanity occurring in Africa's veiled recesses, and he would convey that truth to the world, regardless of the cost. But the price would far exceed his most somber imaginings. What he did not comprehend was that this undertaking would ravage his health, pushing him to the very precipice of human endurance. Every monumental endeavor of the divine exacts a toll, and Livingstone paid that price with his very essence, his blood, his sweat, and his tears. In 1845, he wed Mary Moffat, the daughter of missionary Robert Moffat. Together, they were blessed with 6 children. However, the life of an evangelist in Africa was no sanctuary for a family. The circumstances were unforgiving. Mary and the children were perpetually afflicted. Livingstone observed his own offspring weaken before his very eyes, succumbing to fevers with no access to adequate medical care. And then he faced the most agonizing decision of his existence. He dispatched Mary and the children back to England, separating from them to enable him to continue his mission. Contemplate the weight of such a choice, watching your wife and children board a vessel, knowing that years might elapse before you saw them again, or perhaps never. And precisely that transpired. Mary returned to Africa years later to be reunited with her husband, but Africa demanded its sacrifice. In 1862, a mere 3 months after her arrival, she contracted malaria and perished in Livingstone's embrace. He interred her beneath a baobab tree on the banks of the Zambezi River. Livingstone was utterly devastated. He penned in his diary, "For the first time in my existence, I feel prepared to depart this life." Yet he did not succumb. He pressed onward. While the world perceived him as a hero, an intrepid explorer, Livingstone was hemorrhaging internally. He had forfeited nearly all that mattered: his family, his vitality, his strength. He endured over 30 episodes of malaria. He was attacked by a lion that crushed his shoulder, inflicting chronic pain upon him for the remainder of his days. He spent months lost in the wilderness without provisions, subsisting on roots and imbibing stagnant swamp water. There were junctures when he was so gravely ill that his traveling companions believed his demise imminent. There were days when he required conveyance on a stretcher, as he could no longer ambulate. But why did he persist? Why did he not relinquish his quest? Because he had witnessed too much. He had observed children being bartered. He had seen entire hamlets obliterated. He had witnessed malevolence personified in the slave trade. And he comprehended that if he did not bear testimony, if he did not expose that truth to the world, that barbarity would remain concealed in the shadows. Livingstone composed meticulous accounts, meticulously charted maps, and documented every clandestine route employed by the slave traffickers. He dispatched this intelligence to Britain, to governmental bodies, to journalistic publications. He desired the world to perceive. He willed the world to comprehend, and the world began to heed. His correspondence and reports reached England, igniting a furor. Public sentiment began to shift decisively against the slave trade. Politicians commenced advocating for legislative change. Ecclesiastical bodies began to implore for justice, but Livingstone was not present to witness the full repercussions of his endeavors. In 1871, he vanished in the heart of Africa. No communication, no word, presumed deceased by many. The journalist Henry Morton Stanley was dispatched to locate him, and when he finally did, he uttered the now iconic words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." Livingstone was alive, though physically ravaged. His corporeal form was failing, but his spirit still blazed with the same ardor. Stanley endeavored to persuade him to return home, to rest, to recuperate. But Livingstone demurred. He had a mission to complete. And so, on a morning in May of 1873, in a small settlement known as Chitambo in what is now Zambia, his companions entered his dwelling and discovered him kneeling beside his cot in prayer. David Livingstone had breathed his last on his knees. His African companions, men he had instructed, healed, and cherished, performed an extraordinary act. They removed his heart and committed it to the earth beneath a tree in Africa, for, as they articulated, his heart belonged to Africa. Subsequently, they embalmed his remains and transported them over 1,500 kilometers to the coast, a 9-month odyssey, so that he could be conveyed back to England. Everyone presumed that was the conclusion, that Livingstone's narrative had culminated with his solitary demise in an African hut. But they were mistaken. What transpired subsequent to his passing marked the commencement of a revolution. When David Livingstone's mortal remains arrived in England in 1874, something remarkable occurred. Throngs congregated in the thoroughfares. Newspapers emblazoned his story. The entire nation paused to honor the man who had relinquished everything for Africa. He was entombed in Westminster Abbey, a sanctuary reserved for the preeminent heroes of the British nation, alongside monarchs, prime ministers, and towering figures of history. But this was more than a mere ceremony. It was an awakening. Livingstone's accounts of the slave trade's horrors erupted into public consciousness. His missives, his diaries, his detailed expositions of the brutality he had witnessed, all were disseminated and perused by millions. The impact was cataclysmic. Great Britain, which had already abolished slavery within its own jurisdiction, now perceived with stark clarity that the slave trade persisted, still inflicting suffering in the heart of Africa. And the outcry for justice became deafening. Political figures faced immense pressure. Abolitionist campaigns garnered renewed vigor. Churches and missionary organizations mobilized. Livingstone's appellation became a rallying cry, a catalyst to end the slave trade. And the Almighty employed the passing of one man to ignite a conflagration that could no longer be extinguished. In the ensuing years, the British Empire intensified its efforts to quell the slave trade in East Africa. Treaties were ratified. Slave trading routes were obstructed, and European nations were compelled to abandon the practice. What Livingstone had exposed with his existence, the world was now confronting with its full might. But the ramifications extended beyond the political sphere. Livingstone inspired an entire cohort of missionaries. Young individuals from England, Scotland, and indeed across Europe read his chronicle and felt the identical calling burning within their bosoms. They journeyed to Africa not for conquest, not for exploitation, but to serve, to propagate the gospel, to minister to the ailing, to erect educational institutions and infirmaries, to bring hope where despair had reigned. Livingstone once articulated, "I shall go anywhere, provided it is forward." And so he did. He blazed trails where none existed, charted rivers, discovered the magnificent Victoria Falls, which he christened in honor of the reigning monarch, and explored uncharted territories. But his most profound legacy was not the cartography nor the geographical discoveries. His most profound legacy was demonstrating to the world that a life dedicated to the divine can profoundly impact nations. He possessed no wealth. He commanded no legions. He held no political authority. But he possessed something no empire could ever procure: unswerving obedience. And that obedience irrevocably altered the course of history. To this day, there exist educational institutions, medical facilities, and places of worship in Africa that bear David Livingstone's name. To this day, his narrative is recounted as an exemplar of valor, self-sacrifice, and unshakable faith. To this day, his heart rests interred in Africa, an eternal testament to the fact that he gave his all for those people. But here lies the most profound truth, my brethren and sisters. Livingstone accomplished none of this in isolation. He was frail. He was limited. He was merely a man. But he placed himself in the hands of a God who knows no boundaries. And when the divine finds a willing soul, he moves heaven and earth. The paramount question that lingers is this: what about you? Are you willing? Do you believe that the divine can still utilize ordinary individuals, people such as yourself, to alter the destiny of nations, to shape generations, to illuminate the darkness? Livingstone demonstrated that indeed it is possible, that the divine is still seeking hearts that are willing. What he found in Africa was not merely misery and subjugation. He discovered his purpose. He found the place where the Almighty intended him to be. And by forsaking all, he attained an enduring legacy. The account of David Livingstone is not solely about a man who explored Africa. It is about an individual who grasped a profound truth that few ever comprehend: that life is not measured by what we acquire, but by what we surrender. Livingstone could have remained in Scotland. He could have cultivated a comfortable practice as a physician. He could have led a secure, predictable, risk-free existence. But he chose the antithetical path. He chose the crucible. He chose sacrifice. He chose obedience. even when obedience demanded everything of him. And the outcome? A nation galvanized, a continent transformed, millions of lives touched, a legacy that spans centuries. But here is a truth we cannot disregard. The divine has not changed. He is still seeking men and women prepared to relinquish all. He is still summoning ordinary individuals to achieve extraordinary feats. He is still employing fragile vessels to manifest his might. The question remains, are you willing? Perhaps the divine is not calling you to Africa. Perhaps he is calling you to your immediate vicinity, to your workplace, to that individual whom no one else wishes to reach. Perhaps he is calling you to depart from your comfort, to abandon your security, to take a leap of faith that appears insurmountable. Livingstone was not flawless. He erred. He possessed weaknesses, but he possessed something that made all the difference. He obeyed. For the reality is this: when you entrust everything to the divine, he accomplishes far more than you could ever petition or imagine. Livingstone died on his knees, and that image encapsulates it all. He lived on his knees. He battled on his knees. He triumphed on his knees. And if there is one lesson we can glean from this narrative, it is this: the posture that most profoundly alters the world is not standing. It is kneeling. So I ask you once more, do you believe this? Do you believe that the divine can still employ you, with all your limitations, with all your infirmities, to accomplish something that resonates into eternity? If you have reached this juncture, and this narrative has touched your heart, if you sense that the divine is summoning you to something greater, inscribe in the comments, "I surrender all to you, Lord." I wish to ascertain who has reached the conclusion and is prepared to embrace this step of faith. For in the final analysis, my brethren and sisters, life is not defined by the duration of our existence, but by the completeness of our surrender. David Livingstone lived a mere 60 years, yet his influence extended across centuries. May the divine bless you, and I shall see you in the subsequent presentation.